Without taking any further time, I think we can start the session. People will keep on joining us. First of all, welcome everyone to Product Talk series by Pragmatic Leaders. We are glad to see you all here. Before we start today's session, I would just like to thank Clement for taking our time and conducting this session for our community members. We are really glad. So we have been planning this session from last few months, and finally we got opportunity to host you. So this is going to be really amazing session. So yeah. Uh, Clement, please take forward the session from here.
Yeah, fantastic. Again, thanks so much for having me here. I'm really excited to be speaking for all of you. And again, I realize right now it is late on a weekend in India. So, thank you so much for taking the time to devote yourself to your own professional development. I think, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for all of you. So again, thank you so much for taking the time. So what I wanted to do today was I wanted to talk a little bit about how to move towards remote product management, right? I think as many of us know, we're all currently working with the pandemic. We're all being locked down. And so that's causing us to need to work in very different ways than how we used to work. So I just wanted to share some of my own experiences and my own best practices to help you be able to make that transition more smoothly. So before I really dive in, first off, I'll share a little bit more about myself, just so you have the context. And then from there, I want to talk a little bit more about the trends that are causing remote product management to become a more and more valuable skill over the coming years. And to share a little bit about the challenges that you'll typically face as a remote product manager. Then from there, I then want to talk about how do you collaborate with customers, especially since you can no longer visit them in person right now, right? And again, this is a skill set that will help you no matter whether the pandemic has ended or not. You're going to need to know how to work with customers remotely if you're a remote product manager. And then how do you start working with teammates remotely when you were so used to working together in person? And finally, how do you take care of yourself? So that's what I'm going to be covering today. So to dive right in, again, I'm Clement. I originally started as a management consultant. Then I became a product analyst. And after that, I became a product manager. So currently, I work at Blend, a fintech startup in San Francisco, where I'm currently leading new business initiatives. So I'm empowering us to be able to break into new verticals in the consumer finance space, such as auto loans, personal loans, credit cards, and our home equity line of products. I'm also the co-founder at Product Manager HQ. That's where I've written more than 70 articles on product management. And you can always find me at LinkedIn. So yeah. And just real quick, for many of us who are on the call, we are already product managers. And so I just want to let you know that I recently published a book on how to level up your execution as a product manager. And basically, the goal of this book is to give you another pair of eyes for all of your daily experiences so that you have new frameworks to draw on and be able to excel at the job. For those of you who are not yet product managers who are attending my talk today, I've also published a book on breaking into product management. And again, one of the things that I'm hoping we'll do is that we'll be sending across this deck. I like to keep my decks public so that you can always refer back to it later. And so with that, let's dive right in. So the thing is, even though right now, right, like the pandemic seems like it's going on for a while, we are really living in a permanently new time, right? Like the pandemic has actually caused us to accelerate a lot of technology trends that were already in the making. So first off, we're going to have to continue to shelter in place for a long time. And so we're going to need to continue to know how to work effectively with our customers and with our teammates, even though we're not going to be sitting next to them. And that's going to be a really big shift for all of us. On top of that, due to technology, due to Zoom, right, like you can meet with anyone in the world at any time, right? And so that makes telework possible, right? Being able to have Slack, have email, be able to code in the cloud, all makes us able to work remotely. And on top of that, due to globalization, right, like the barriers of entry have never been lower. So that means that no matter where your company is based, no matter where your organization is based, that means that there are wider talent pools. You might work with someone from anywhere in the world. And because that talent pool is larger, that means that you're going to be competing against more people. And that also means that on the flip side, there are so many more markets for you to be able to tackle. And so if we want to keep up in this new world where we're going to be competing against everyone across the globe, and we want to be able to break into all of these markets across the world, we're going to need to gain new skill sets as product managers. And that means that we really need to invest in how do we work remotely. And so just to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of remote product management that I've seen firsthand, right? So the thing is, when you're working remotely, right, it's completely different from working with colleagues in person because there are a couple of reasons in play. Like there are a couple of new friction points that are totally different. So first off, it takes a lot longer for people to respond, right? Like when you're typically talking with a colleague, they respond to you in real time. Whereas when you're working remotely, unless you're on a Zoom call, you need to wait for them to acknowledge your message, and then they have to read through your message, digest it, and then they can give you a response. And that takes a lot longer. On top of that, it can be really hard to be able to coordinate across time zones or to be able to communicate across different technology stacks, right? So because everyone is working from home, there's just not the same type of standardization of working processes, right? And that can make it a lot harder for us to be able to do our day-to-day job. Furthermore, it's pretty difficult to know who is available when to be able to talk to, right? I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about co-located product management is that I could always walk up to my designer or to my engineer when they weren't busy and have a discussion right there. And that meant that we had really high velocity. It meant that we had a lot of spontaneity. It meant that we were able to be really creative. And now we're restricted, right? Because now that barrier to entry is so much higher. Now I have to proactively reach out and say, hey, are you free? Then we have to go set up a Zoom call. And then we have to go discuss what are the objectives of this call, right? It's no longer as fluid and as informal as it used to be. And of course, it's also difficult to know kind of who's struggling, where, when, right? Because again, it's a lot harder to be able to see whether someone is struggling at work and be able to intervene and help them out. And so because there are all of these challenges in the way, now that we know which ones they are, we can really think through how do we change the way that we work so that we can get rid of these frictions, right? And I want to break it up into three core parts, right? The way that I think about it is really there are three groups of stakeholders that we need to learn to work with differently so that we're effective. So I'm going to first talk about how we're going to work effectively with customers remotely. Then I'm going to talk about how we can work effectively with teammates remotely. And then finally, how do we make sure that we're protecting ourselves? Because we're also really important to this process. And we're all also really working through a totally new time in the world. And by the way, I do see questions coming up in the chat. What we'll do is at the end of the presentation, I'll go ahead and do Q&A there. So first off, in terms of working with customers remotely, so one of the things that I used to rely on is, I used to fly out to a customer, right? Like I used to go to a customer directly so that we could actually talk live, so that we could do whiteboarding sessions together, so that I could put prototypes in front of them, so that I could really dive deep and understand their end users, right? Like I used to shadow kind of the people who would be using my software so that I could really deeply understand, well, what does your working process look like? Well, there are problems in that right now, due to the pandemic, a lot of customers now have really different priorities. And they may not have the time or the mental bandwidth or the priority to tell you that they're going to be prioritizing things differently, right? But the thing is, that's really no excuse because the thing is, as product managers, we need to go find what is best for our customers, right? We need to prioritize for their benefit because we always need to create value for our customers before we can capture that value in return, whether it's a sales contract or whether it's subscription revenue or whatever it may be, right? And so we need to conduct empathetic outreach to really understand where are our customers, right? And the thing is, when I say we need to conduct empathetic outreach, what I'm saying is we need to be really careful about how we position that message. Because on the one hand, we don't want to be a burden, right? Like our customers are all also working through these same problems that we are. They're also learning how to work remotely for the first time. They're trying to figure out how to navigate their business in a totally new environment, right? And they might be much more used to talking to you in person about priorities, right? They may not be, used to or may not agree to typing out all of their priorities in an email. And so we need to keep in mind that our customers are suffering right now. And so we need to keep that in mind when we do reach out to them. The second part is when we reach out to them, right? We need to be empathetic, right? We can't just be like, hey, you need to tell me what I need to do. Because again, they don't have the time for that, right? We need to really demonstrate to them, hey, we care and we're here for you. And we really want to discuss how can we continue to help you work through these really challenging times, right? So when you do reach out to customers, right, one of the things that, again, you'll want to do is you don't want to push them, right? Don't ask them immediately saying, hey, I want to talk to you next Wednesday at 9 a.m., right? Because again, they might have really different priorities. And so you want to be really gentle. You want to say, hey, I realize that we're working in really different times right now. And I want to make sure that you still remember that I'm a resource for you whenever you need it. So here are a couple of times that I'm free, happy to work around your schedule. Drop me a line. I'm just here to help you. Let me know how I can be of use to you. Right? And that can be a very effective way to reach out to let people know that you still care about them and that you really want to make sure that they're going to succeed. So sometimes they won't respond. And again, that's okay because maybe you're no longer their priority. And that's completely fine because for customers, they may have so many different things that are on their mind. But say that they do reach out back out to you and they say, hey, thank you so much for reaching out. Yeah, it's been a really crazy time. Here are our new priorities, right? When you see those new priorities, you really have two options, right? So option number one is your customer says, I need you to do something, or maybe they don't even say, I need you. They say, we need to be able to do something new with our business. This is the direction that we're headed. And you have a choice. You can say, well, I'm willing to flex into this role. I'm willing to change the way that we work so that we can try to go after this totally new opportunity, right? And so as an example, maybe your customers are using software where previously they had door-to-door salespeople, right? They knocked on people's doors to be able to sell whatever it is that they were selling. And they were using your product to be able to track those sales. Well, now there aren't any door-to-door salesmen, right? And so now maybe they're pivoting to being able to sell over the phone. That's a totally different problem. And maybe your product is not yet ready to do that. Well, it's up to you to decide, do I want to be able to pivot into this new market opportunity? Do I want to be able to step up knowing that I'm going to be working in a totally different environment? I would strongly suggest that you do so because the fact of the matter is that because your customers have deprioritized your current initiatives to be able to focus on their new initiatives, you want to be there with your customers. Because again, if your customers don't find you to be valuable to them, then your company doesn't have value. And so you really need to think about what is the value that we're providing to customers, right? So again, I would strongly recommend that if your customers are saying, hey, we are changing the way that we work, we are changing the way that we sell, we are changing the products that we're offering, right? And we need you to help us make that transformation possible, then I would say that that's something where you can demonstrate your partnership. Rather than being a vendor, you can really be working alongside them to demonstrate that you can bring a lot of value to the table. That said, sometimes that doesn't happen, right? Sometimes customers they have other things that they need to work through. For example, many of my customers, they needed to work through all of these, disaster plans, right? They needed to figure out how do we make sure that we keep our employees safe? How do we know when to reopen the office? How do we deal with hurricanes? How do we deal with food shortages, right? And the thing is, that's not my product's core strength, right? Like the product that I run is a digital lending product, right? So I can't help them with planning for disasters. I can't help them for planning for evacuations. And so it's entirely okay for me to say, okay, well, if that's your top priority and there's not really any way that I can intervene to help you, then this is actually a really great time for you and for your team, because now is the time that you can reinvest elsewhere, right? Maybe there was a new business or a new product line that you wanted to launch. Well, now's a good time because you now are no longer beholden to your customers to maintain your current product lines, right? Maybe you have a lot of design debt. Maybe you have a lot of technical debt. Maybe it's time to do a refactor so that your product is even faster, even more robust for the future, right? And so again, first, reach out to customers to understand what are their new priorities as you're working remotely, right? And again, we need to realize that customers are no longer going to be as responsive as they used to be. So it's really on us to reach out to them to say, hey, I realized that previously we had worked on a roadmap together. I know that you likely have thrown that out the window. How do I help make sure that I can stay on top of your priorities so that I can serve you the best, right? And then really listen to them and decide whether you want to pivot into that new space that is now newly valuable to them, or whether you want to reinvest elsewhere to be able to unlock more capabilities so that when your customers do decide that you're the first priority again, they will come back to you, right? So that's how I think about working with customers remotely. And again, we just need to keep in mind that we need to be empathetic in all of our outreach, right? Like we can no longer say, hey, let's jump on a call right now. It's a lot harder to say, hey, I need to take time from your users to be able to do user interviews or to be able to do prototypes, because again, they don't have the time for that. And so whatever you can do to eliminate the burden that they need to take to be able to work with you, go do that, right? Remove that burden from them. And so that means that you're going to need to stretch to be able to help them help you. So that's how to work with customers remotely. I think what I really want to focus on is how to work with teammates remotely. Because again, kind of product managers, we fill the white space, right? The thing is, even if we didn't exist at the company, our teams would continue to build products. Our engineers would continue to build, our designers would continue to design, our sales teams would continue to sell, right? And so the thing is, product managers are always serving their teammates. And so it's really crucial that we understand the pains that our teammates now have in working remotely for the first time, right? So let's take a look from their eyes of what are the challenges that our teammates are facing so that we understand how we can step in and help them level up and make it through this really harsh time. So the thing is, first off, of course, due to all of the landscape changes, right, it's a lot harder for people to be able to stay focused on work, right? So maybe your teammates are working from home, and because they're parents, they have to take care of their kids, or now they have to worry about their parents who are at risk for having the virus, or maybe you have teammates who do not have an office setup, and so they don't have access to internet, or they may not be able to communicate as quickly. Maybe they don't have a webcam, right? Reach out to each of your teammates to really understand, hey, I want to know how I can help you the most, right? So one of the things that I think about myself as is I think of myself as a product manager as a servant leader, right? We lead by serving others. And so we need to understand, where is everyone on our team? How are they doing, right? And so in my outreach with my teammates, again, engineers, designers, marketers, salespeople, legal and compliance, every stakeholder that you touch, right? Go do that, informal one-on-one, whether it's 30 minutes, whether it's an hour, whatever they're comfortable with, and just really understand kind of what impact has working remotely caused on them, right? Well, how do they prefer to work now? A lot of the ways in which we used to prefer to work are no longer accessible, right? Maybe in the past, people would reserve mornings for meetings and then afternoons for work. But now that they're working remotely, it's different. Maybe now they are moving their meetings to a different time during the day. Maybe they are only able to come online for a couple of hours before they have to go offline for a couple of hours due to their own home commitments. It really depends, right? And so you really want to reach out to them to understand what is the effect of the pandemic. And on top of that, it's not always that it's bad, right? So a couple of my engineers have actually said, Clement, I really, really actually enjoy working from home because that means that I'm not distracted anymore, right? I don't need to worry about, people tapping me on the shoulder and interrupting my train of thought. And that's really important because now I know, okay, great. I need to make sure that I'm not interrupting them when they're really diving into deep work. And so then I can ask, okay, tell me about the times when you begin deep work. Tell me about the times when you're done with deep work and you're tired and you're exhausted, and I can step in and discuss other topics, right? And so again, it's really all about understanding, where are our teammates at? It's really treating them with empathy and with a lot of care and respect and love, right? Because we need to make sure that we continue to be the beating hearts of our teams, right? Our teams look to us for guidance in terms of, what is it that we're going to do next? How quickly do we need to work? How do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of our customers, right? So really check in with people. And ideally, you want to first begin with an ad hoc check-in if you haven't done so yet, right? Again, just really go and understand, hey, how are you doing right now? How can I be most helpful? And then start kicking off regular check-ins to make sure that you can really understand where they're at, and so that you can learn how to change your processes, right? Kind of the way that I think about this is almost like a mini retrospective with each person to better understand, how can I change the processes that I'm using to run our team so that I can better fit your needs, right? And again, some of the things that I'm talking about right now, they all sound very common sense because they are, right? The thing is, we could be doing these things, once we are no longer working remotely. But the critical part to call out is that in the past, it was nice to have these things before we were working remotely, right? But now it is mandatory that we do this, right? Because if we don't understand how our teammates are doing, if we can't catch them burning out, if we can't catch them running into a really hard roadblock that they can't get over, then we're going to lose that person in terms of their productivity and their commitment to the mission. And when our teammates burn out, we can no longer ship products, and then our customers will suffer, right? So it's all about making sure that our teammates come first. We need to make sure that they're doing fine. But of course, being this empathetic human being is not enough, because at the end of the day, business still needs to run, right? Like, we can't just give everyone kind of a 3-week holiday. We really do need to deliver something for our customers. And so shifting away from this more empathetic, more emotional support stance, we also need to provide structure. So again, one of the things that product managers think that they do is we believe that we build products. That's only partially true. We don't just build products, we actually build the processes that create the product. We actually build the engine, right? And so again, we're the people who are in charge of determining how do we want our retrospectives to look like? How do we want our stand-ups to look like? How do we want documentation to happen? How do we want meetings to be run, right? So we are the master coordinators for our teams. And because we're the master coordinators, it falls on us to provide much more structure so that people know exactly what it is that they need to do, right? Because again, in the past, it was way easier to be able to, talk to someone directly in person and say, hey, it looks like you're a little bit lost, or hey, I feel like we're misaligned, let's talk about it. But here, we can't do that anymore. We don't know when they're going to be available for us to talk to. There's not that spontaneity anymore. And so we need to go and provide structure upfront. And so again, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about, these are all nice to have skills when we're all working in person, right? Because again, other people can help fill that gap. But now that we're working remotely, these are mandatory. We have to do this, or else we're not going to be able to keep our teams aligned so that they can deliver high quality products at fast velocity, right? So first part is, meetings are still, how product managers get things done, right? We need to understand how are people thinking about particular problems? What are the decisions that they're trying to make? What information are they missing so that we can fill in those gaps, right? So we still do a lot of meetings. The thing that I've seen a lot is, back when, we were all in the office, I saw a lot of meetings weren't really that effective, right? Kind of we assumed that the other person would help us figure out what the meeting was for. And that's no longer appropriate because everyone is now working under a lot larger mental stress. And so you need to step up, right? So to make sure that you drive an effective meeting, first make sure that you know who needs to be in that meeting and what the objective of the meeting is. In fact, I basically reversed those two. Sorry. For effective meetings, first, what is the outcome of the meeting, right? Like, what is it that needs to happen by the end for us to call this a success? And then from there, then we can determine who needs to be there, what's on the agenda, how long does it need to run, right? Then if we can package all of that into an agenda and put it into the meeting before we even have the meeting, that way people know exactly what their roles are going to be when they join you, right? Then in the meeting, when you begin, kick off with the agenda. Tell people this is what we're going to do to make sure that everyone is still aligned. When you end the meeting, right, make sure that you go back through the agenda and say, we did these things, here are our decisions. And then after the meeting, send out meeting notes that say, hey, here's how we tackled this thing. And I know this sounds really burdensome, right? It's like, wow, I have to go do all of this process. But again, if you don't, your teammates are very likely to get misaligned. And it's not because that they don't want to be aligned, it's that it's so much harder to stay aligned now, right? So if you want to succeed in working remotely, you need to pay that mental overhead tax on behalf of your teammates, right? Similarly, no matter what touch point you have, whether it's one-on-ones, whether it's retrospectives, sprint kickoff, stand-ups, repeat your priorities for the sprint, right? Like repeat it over and over again. This is what we're going to be doing this sprint. Here's our progress, and this is why it matters, right? Because again, it can be very easy for people to forget what their priorities are when they're no longer working with you day-to-day directly. Try to document as much as you can. It is really hard now for people to be able to remember collectively, how do we come to a decision? And so when you write down, this was the decision and here's how we got to it, now you're creating a shared truth in place of whatever kind of fuzzy truth is out there with everyone's heads, right? So you want to make sure that you document as much as you can so that you have something that you can refer back to later. Share your messages across multiple channels. So, be sure to, again, send out meeting notes or send out, customer information over Slack, email, make sure that you do so in person. The more that you can share information, the better that people will do. And finally, the thing that we really need to keep in mind is, we really need to be as transparent as possible because it is much harder for people to now give us input, right? We are not as available for other people because people can't just walk up to us and say, hey, Clement, I have an idea, or hey, Clement, how is our roadmap doing, right? And so we need to be transparent so that they can reach out to us and be involved in building out the project. Right? So in terms of how to do that, one of the things that you'll want to do is you'll want to make sure that you share your work in progress roadmap, right? And what I mean by that is by making sure that your teammates know how you're thinking about all of your prioritization decisions, that is a good way for them to be able to intervene and say, hey, Clement, I think you're missing this piece of context. Or, hey, Clement, these are customers who aren't going to like this roadmap for this reason, right? And so the thing is, instead of trying to come up with the perfect thing and then sending that out, right, and doing that in a really big presentation, now we want to make it into really small bite-sized chunks. We want to say, hey, this is my current version of the roadmap as of yesterday. It's like 60% complete. It's probably not correct. I want you to take a look at it, right? And continue to be as transparent as you can in terms of, this is how I'm making these decisions because this was the information that I have. And if I have this other piece of information, I can make a different decision. So you really want to make sure that your teammates know, how is it that you're making decisions on their behalf? And again, that will really ensure that you build trust with your stakeholders so that they know that they can continue to rely on you while you're working remotely, so that they know that they can continue to be heard as you're coming up with priorities and decisions and timelines. So I've discussed all of this stuff about how to work with customers and how to work with teammates. And really kind of the end points are be empathetic, be proactive, be structured, right? But the thing is, this is a lot to ask for us, right? Like, we're doing so much stuff now. And so we need to make sure that we take care of ourselves when we're working as remote product managers, because if we don't, our teams will fall apart. And so remember that you're your highest priority. So take the time after today's session to really think about, are you taking the most care of yourself? Because as a remote product manager, you're going to be subject to a lot of different stresses that you didn't used to have to face back when you were a co-located product manager. And so first off, make sure that on your own calendar, whether that's your work calendar or personal calendar, you schedule time for yourself. Because if you don't, you're going to be spending all day making sure that everyone's doing their work. You're going to be spending all the time thinking about how is work doing. And so make sure that you protect yourself. Schedule time for yourself, whether that's weekends, whether that's weekdays, so that you know that it's time to shut off the computer. Because again, one of the challenges is now home and work are the same place. And so if we don't make sure that our brains can pivot away from work, we're going to burn out. So make sure you schedule some personal time for yourself and make it clear that other people, should not intrude on your personal time, because that is time that you need to be able to recharge. Again, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else. As you're working, right, be sure to assess, are there things that I can be doing to make sure that I can work more effectively, right? So now that we're all working remotely, you might notice that you have a different energy pattern, right? And what I mean by that is, in the past, I used to be a morning person in the office, right? I used to really like doing all of my work in the mornings and I have my meetings in the afternoons. But I've noticed that as I became remote, my energy patterns are now different, right? Now, instead, I want to make sure that, rather than having all of my meetings on a single day, that I spread it out over the week. I have a different working cadence for how I want to do individual contributor work, whether that's doing specs or whether that's doing analytics, right? And so keep in mind that your own preferences have changed. So consider that, right? Make sure that your working space is clean. Make sure that, you're able to transition cleanly between work and personal life, so that you don't feel like you're always working, right? Make sure that, you have a good working setup so that, you have your webcam. Make sure that, you can not let your back get messed up. Have a good chair, have a good desk, whatever you can do to protect your working self, you need to do, because if you don't invest in your own body, then you won't be able to do good work. Similarly, take care of your brain, take care of your brain, and take care of your body. So make sure that you're exercising. Everyone says this all the time. Make sure that you exercise. Make sure that you de-stress, whether that's meditation or whether that's hanging out with friends. Just make sure that you are protecting yourself and stay connected with people, right? Because the thing is, all of us are human beings. We're all social creatures. And so, be sure to reach out to the people that you really care about so that you continue to draw strength from them. And then finally, again, these are really different times. And the thing is, I can't give you any one prescriptive game plan for how to tackle things, because your customers are all working so differently now and they have such different priorities. Your teammates are in such different working environments now than they used to be. And so the most critical part is just to continue to be thoughtful and curious. Reflect on yourself, reflect on your customers, reflect on your teammates. How can I help them do better? How can I help myself do better? And by doing so, that is a really good way for us to ensure that we can drive just as much success, if not better success, remotely, right? And so again, all the things that I talked about, this most surprising part is that all of this stuff is stuff we should already be doing as co-located product managers. But the thing is, Now, rather than them being nice to have, they're now essential table stakes skills that if we don't have, our teams will fall apart. And so it is really, really important that we take on these soft skills to make sure that everyone feels connected, to make sure that everyone knows what the priority is so that you take care of yourself. And so wrapping up, working remotely is really, really difficult, but it's also really rewarding because now you get to see all of these different people, in their own home environments, right? You get to help them work through these really challenging times, and you're the one who's making sure that they succeed while everyone is, moving through this crisis together. And again, the skills that you learn in becoming a remote product manager right now, because we're all forced to become remote product managers, it will pay dividends for the rest of your working life, right? You need to be proactive with customers and teammates. You need to really understand what it is that they're struggling with, and you need to reach out. You can't wait for them to come to you because they won't remember that they need to talk to you. And so you need to remember to talk to them. Really focus on what the largest priority is, whether that is something that you're already doing or not. And don't be afraid to pivot because now is a very different time than it used to be. All of our previous assumptions are now broken. And so it is okay for us to re-innovate ourselves and to do something totally different. Be a genuine human being, right? Really care for others and try to communicate as much as you possibly can. Try to document as much as you can because it is so much easier for people to lose the thread. It's so much easier for people to become misaligned now that we're all remote. And so really, really, really try to document as much as you can. And finally, take care of yourself because if you don't, you can't do all of the things that I just mentioned above. And again, you're really important. Without you, we wouldn't have amazing products in the world. And so that's it. I'll go ahead and head it over to Q&A. Piyush, let me know if you want me to just read off of what's in the chat or whether you want to moderate. Happy to do it either way.
Right. So actually, we have a lot of questions submitted as well, but we can go ahead with the questions from chat. And if the time permits, we'll take them up as well.
Okay, great. So unfortunately, I don't have access to the Slack right now, so I can't really see that. I'll answer the one in the chat, and then Piyush, if you can go ahead and ask me those questions, I can work through them in our remaining time.
Right. So we have a question from Prateek. Is there a difference in product management in 100% remote company from a non-remote company?
Yeah, fantastic question. And so the thing is, I actually used to work with a remote development team back when I was a co-located product manager, right? And so I would say that this is a little bit like a spectrum, right? So the thing is, in terms of working together in person, right? It really depends on which stakeholders you're working in person with. And so when your entire company is all co-located together, then it's very easy for you to communicate between every single set of stakeholders. When the company is 100% remote, then of course, all of these frictions that I mentioned in terms of reaching out, in terms of being transparent with your roadmap and your decision-making is really critical because now kind of everyone is remote. And so there's friction across every communication channel. But if you are working as a product manager in a not remote company, and either you're remote or some set of your teammates are remote, you're kind of in between, right? And so the thing is, consider how, whether you're the remote person or whether other teammates are remote, what are the challenges that they face in being remote? Again, reach out to them to really understand, okay, well, what are the challenges that you're facing so that you can take that into account in rebuilding your processes to take care of them, right? And again, I used to actually work with a remote development team. I used to have engineers and QA analysts in India, China, and Hawaii. And so, they're, of course, in very different time zones. They have very different cultures, right? I think working with Chinese teammates, working with Indian teammates, working with Hawaiian teammates, they all have very different personalities and very different cultures. And so we need to take into account kind of their current situation so that we can make sure that we're communicating the best information that we can to them.
Thanks. I hope that answers Prateek. Next, we have question from Yash. Any tips which might help in reducing follow-ups with the engineering team while working remotely?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that can be really helpful in working with an engineering team that's remote is, first off, in terms of making sure that everyone is accountable, one of the things that I like to do is, and again, this depends on your communication channel, whether you're on Microsoft Teams, whether you're on Slack, whether you're on email. One of the things I like to do is make sure that, our entire team is on the same set of communications so that every day, after stand-up, let's say, we can say, hey, Clement is on point to do X, right? Piyush is on point to do Y. Yash is on point to do Z by, whatever timeline. And so that way, all of us are keeping each other accountable, and we can kind of keep track of how those are going, right? So um, that means more work for you, again, because you need to go and collect who's on point to do what. But when you kind of make sure that everyone is watching each other for, hey, when can we expect this work to be done? Like that can help a lot. And again, one of the things that can be really helpful is just to check in with folks, after you have done a spec, right? So let's say you're working with engineers, you broke down a spec together, you talk them through the spec. Then instead of saying, great, slot this in the sprint whenever, ask them explicitly, when do you think you'll be done with decomposing this into tickets, right? When do you think you'll be done with having an estimate for when we want to get everything done? When do you believe that we'll get these things shipped? And by being really explicit with our questions, that way we can make sure that we are staying on track. The other thing that I personally find really helpful is, I keep my own personal Trello board. And so my own Trello board, of course, I have my own set of priorities that I need to work on in the day. But I also have this parking lot where I'm basically tracking, I made an ask to some of my teammates, and this is the expected time that I expect them to come back to me, right? So now I can see a list of everyone's obligations to me in terms of when they're supposed to get back to me. So if I notice that someone has not yet responded to me, then I can go reach out to them and say, hey, last week we said that, this week you'd give me a status update. I haven't seen the status update yet. What's going on? How can I help, right? And if they do respond, they can go ahead and remove that off of your open questions list, right? So basically, by tracking all of the asks that you've made to teammates and kind of the dates by when they're supposed to get back to you, that can help to remove a lot of the mental burden on you for trying to remember who said what and how do I do whatever. It's making sure that you have a system for tracking all of these asks for just yourself, so that way you know when to reach out, again, compassionately, right? Because again, everyone is really busy. Everyone is really working through difficult times. So I personally found, again, kind of those two together to be really helpful. Is one, rather than having individual communications, try to have team-wide communications so that we can all be holding each other accountable, whether that is things about deadlines or about priorities. And two, track all of your outstanding asks so that you know when you're supposed to reach back out to someone, to remind them that, hey, I haven't seen this thing yet, or to let them know, hey, I really need your response here. I haven't seen it yet. How can we make this happen together, right? So that's kind of how I keep track of all of the outstanding asks.
Great. Next, we have question again from Pratik. How is hiring process? Required skill sets vary in 100% remote companies?
Yeah, that's a great question. So unfortunately, I'm not really able to answer this question because I used to work in a co-located company that is temporarily a remote company and will then become co-located after the lockdown ends. What I can tell you is that when a company is 100% remote, the things that recruiters are going to be watching out for are going to be, one, how do you make sure that you communicate really, really effectively, right? Because again, you can no longer rely on just being there in person, right? So you need to demonstrate your ability to structure projects in a really clear way. And you need to demonstrate that you know how to reach out to stakeholders to understand their concerns and their priorities, right? So what I would say is the hiring process is going to be mostly the same in that you're still going to need to go through interviews. You're still going to need to send resumes. You're still going to need to send cover letters, right? You're still going to need to do some case presentation. But the things that they're going to be looking for are going to be a little bit different. So do you know how to communicate remotely? Do you know how to structure your thoughts? Do you know how to reach out to people? Do you know how to kick off projects when you haven't done this before? And again, one of the things to keep in mind is, I'm speaking about folks who used to be co-located becoming remote at their current jobs. So my area of expertise, unfortunately, is not how do I get hired by a company that's looking for a remote product manager, since I don't have that experience. So I can definitely hypothesize about it, since I have some friends, some colleagues who are working remotely, but that's not my area of expertise. So I do want to go ahead and flag that first.
Thanks. Next one is from Sankalp. Clement, for a person trying to enter into product role based out of another country, how would you recommend they negotiate their salary given the different cost of living?
Yeah, for sure. So again, unfortunately, I can't really answer this question very well from my own personal experience because I haven't done this before, right? But what I would say is from a general framework perspective, right? Part one is understanding what that country looks like in terms of their standards for pay, right? What I mean by that is, as an example, in the United States, a product manager might make something like, let's say, $100,000 per year, but in the United Kingdom, they might only make something like $70,000 per year. And so, even though the cost of living is not that different between the United States and the United Kingdom, in fact, in the United Kingdom, the cost of living is higher, you might get paid less. And that is because there are different markets in play, right? There are different supply curves and demand curves. Some countries really, really, really need product managers and don't have a lot. And so they're willing to pay a lot, or they really understand the value of a product manager. Some countries don't really understand what product managers do. And so they get paid very little. And so you basically cannot negotiate if that country doesn't really see your value. There's no way for you to be able to pin it back to your current country's pay, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. And the second part is, if you are looking for a country that their baseline is similar to your country's current baseline, or is even higher than your current country's baseline, then you can now start talking about, okay, well, how am I different from the baseline, right? Like, what is the additional value that I have over the average candidate, right? And you need to really make sure that you document that really clearly, so that when you go into these salary negotiations, you can say, hey, based on my own research, I know that what you're currently offering is a fair market price for someone with this type of experience. But because I am bringing you these other types of experiences, my home country compensates me additionally by this much. So I believe that you should be compensating me additionally for this much. And again, the key thing to keep in mind with negotiations is, do you have an alternative, right? Because if they're going to be your only potential employer, then you don't have a lot of wiggle room. But if you have other employers that you can fall back on, then you can be a little bit more risky. You can be a little bit more aggressive in making that ask, because you don't need to worry about not having a job entirely. One of the things that I do want to comment for everyone here is that, unfortunately, product management jobs around the world have generally been closing, right? Because the thing is, product managers, our job is to be able to increase the value by making bets, by taking risks. But right now, most companies cannot take risks. And so they're trying to cut back on their R&D centers. They're trying to cut back on product managers. The thing is, product managers, they may not be fired as often, but a lot of the job openings that are open have all been closed. And so one of the things, again, to keep in mind is, how do you make that trade-off in terms of negotiations? If you do have a backup, then feel free to be more aggressive and share that, hey, this is my current situation. Here's what other people are offering me. And this is why I think that's a much fairer offer than your offer. If you don't have that leeway, then it's up to you to decide, am I okay with this employer saying that I don't want to negotiate with you and I want to retract my offer because I can't hire you, right? So just keep that in mind as you work through those negotiations.
Yeah. Next question is from Pranav. Please suggest some good resources to develop product management skills.
Yeah, for sure. So this is going to be a really broad category, right? So not necessarily targeted at just remote product management. So first off, it really depends on what skills you're looking to grow in as a product manager. Because the thing is, there are so many different things that product managers do, right? We do analytics, we do user research, we do sales, we do marketing, we do QA, right? We could do all of these different things. And so there is not one single resource that will solve all of these problems. What I can say is that there are some communities that are better at doing this than others. And so again, you're part of Pragmatic leaders, so definitely lean into this particular community to be able to gather resources. Of course, I'm currently leading Product Manager HQ, and so we do a pretty good job in terms of discussing the core skill sets for product managers, right? But again, I don't want to bias you in terms of what it is that you need. What I think is one of the really amazing things that's happening is there are so many online resources now for so many different people coming from so many different sources. And so, some organizations are much better at talking about specific skill sets than others, right? So as an example, Reforge is a really good, so Reforge is a really great place to learn about growth product management. But growth product management is very different from, let's say, learning about analytics or learning about design or learning about platforms, right? And so the thing is, there are all of these different things that you could potentially be looking to learn as a product manager. What I would say is, first, take a look at yourself. What are my current skill sets? And what are the skill sets that I feel that I'm missing, right? Then, after we've identified what you're good at and what you want to grow in, And then take these things that you want to grow in. And again, I know this sounds very basic, but if you run a Google search on those topics, you'll likely find a lot of resources that have already been written, right? The thing is, because product management has been around for, let's say, 10 years, 20 years, and because there are no classes on it, that's meant that a lot of people in the community have decided to write about their own thoughts and their own experiences. And so there are a lot of really rich free resources you can use. There are a lot of paid courses that you can take to be able to level up as a product manager. Again, what I can say is that I've compiled all of my thoughts into those 2 books that I mentioned that I published. So Breaking into Product Management, if you're not yet a product manager, and How to Execute, excellent execution as a product manager, if you're currently a product manager. So I would recommend using those. But again, I'm biased because I'm the one who wrote them. So definitely conduct your own independent research in terms of what resources will best help you understand how to close those gaps, right? And again, I want to emphasize that you need to look at yourself to understand what gaps you have. And of course, feel free to reach out to your colleagues to ask them to assess what gaps you have, right? But the thing is, I can't just say, oh, you should go look at X or look at Y, because I don't know where your gaps are. I'm not you, right? And so you really do need to take that time to reflect on yourself. Where do I want to grow? Who do I want to become? And then use that to identify what resources will best fit you.
Okay. So next question is from Shivraj. He says, how do a 12-year database admin transition to a product role without a business degree?
Great question. So one of the things that I want to call out first is, I don't have a business degree either. I don't have a business degree. I don't have an engineering degree. I'm not very good at design, right? And so the thing is, it's not about what requirements do I meet, right? Because the thing is, when we try to think about ourselves as like, oh, I need to check this box in terms of I have this certification, or I have this, or I have that, that turns you into a commodity, right? When I say a commodity is something like rice or something like flour. It's something where every single unit of that commodity is exactly the same. Product managers are not commodities, right? Each of us is very, very different, right? Like the way to think about a product manager is almost like a house, right? A house is very, very different because it has things that people really like about that house, and has things that people don't really like about that house, and different people value the same house very differently. Similarly, product managers are valued very differently by different companies, right? And so the thing is, what really, really matters is not what should I go do next, or how can I become a product manager? The really big question to ask is, who needs a product manager and why do they need a product manager, right? Because the thing is, one of the things that we need to keep in mind is companies do not hire product managers so that you can take the job. Companies create product manager roles because they cannot solve a pain that they have right now. And so you need to understand, okay, what are the different companies that I'm interested in, and what problem are they trying to solve, right? So one thing that I can immediately think of is some companies will not want a database admin to become a product manager because maybe they are running a mobile app. And so a mobile app doesn't really use database administrative skills. But that doesn't mean that you can't be a product manager, because so many other companies are looking for people who really deeply understand databases, right? Platform product managers, API product managers are all fantastic product management roles, and they really need someone who really deeply understands how to administer databases. And so you need to understand, what are the problems that this company is trying to solve by hiring this kind of product manager, and do I solve that problem? So one of the things that I'll say about myself, I am explicitly a business to business product manager. I'm really good at talking with customers. I'm really good at doing sales. I'm really good at working through change management and doing a lot of user interviews. What I am not good at is I'm not good at being a business to consumer product manager, because I'm not very good at design. I'm not very good at running A/B tests, and that's okay. So I am good at certain things. I am not good at other things. And if I said, well, I need to become a business to consumer product manager, I would fail the whole time. And that would be really, really discouraging, right? And so it's really important for me to remember, well, there are different kinds of companies that want my current skill set. And so I should go after those companies instead of other companies that don't care about my skill set, right? So when we talk about, I'm a database administrator, great. What are the skills that you have, and which companies value those skills, right? Rather than you saying, oh, well, I want to work for Facebook on their messenger app on mobile, because your skills don't align to that job description. And so it's not fair for you to try to compare yourself against that, because that's not the type of person you are. And that's not the type of pain that the company is trying to solve, right? So what we need to remember is that product managers are also products. We have some market that we need to go target, and that market has its own pain points. And so we need to decide, who do we want to serve? And when we decide who we want to serve, what are the pains that they have, so that then we can determine whether we are the best person to go solve that pain.
Thanks. I hope that was useful. Uh, Next question is from Hemal. Earning trust from a team is biggest factor working with engineering team remotely. Because sometimes when we as when we as PM document during the meeting, the teammates may think that we are documenting because we are not trusting them. How to overcome challenge? Okay.
Yeah, for sure. So the thing to keep in mind is, you don't want to do anything unilaterally. Like, don't do stuff just because, I told you to do stuff. Do stuff with the buy-in of your team, right? So one of the things that can be very helpful is to, again, reach out to teammates and say, I've noticed that, it's a lot harder for us to communicate while we're remote. I still really trust you, and I want to make sure that I'm doing the best that I can for you. What are the types of things that I can be doing to make you more effective, right? And the thing that I've noticed is that in general, my teams ask for more documentation from me, because they say, well, Clement, I don't really know what the user requirements are going to be, or I don't really know what design you had in mind. And I can't check with you in person anymore because you're not there in person anymore, right? So what my team has asked from me is, hey, we'd really love more documentation, but not just documentation for documentation's sake. We want documentation of these kinds of things, right? So I want you, Clement, to document your customer calls, because if we don't understand what the customer is thinking, then there's no way for us to build the right product. So I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I will document my customer calls, and I will make sure that each of you have a copy, so that it's not required reading, but if you want to read it, it's there, right? And so the thing is, you want to make sure that you have your teammates buy in, right? If your teammates say, well, we feel like what we have right now is good enough, then trust them, right? Trust them and say, okay, great, let's give it a shot. Let's see if we can make things better, right? Like, continue to conduct retrospectives and see whether you can make that process work. And if over time you're still seeing that, hey, people are not able to stay on top of my decisions, they're not able to stay on top of my prioritization and my logic, one thing that you can raise in a retrospective is, hey, I'm noticing that we're having some troubles with these kinds of processes. And again, I want to just emphasize that I'm so glad to be working with all of you, right? Like, I really appreciate working with all of you, and I want to make all of you more effective. Would it help if I documented these kinds of things, right? Again, ask them, get that permission from them. Of course, don't do things just because, some speaker told you, hey, this is a good thing to do. Ask your team, because the thing is, you serve your teammates. And so if your teammates say, I need you to do this, then do it. And if your teammates say, I don't need you to do this, then don't do it, right? It's actually pretty simple. It's just that I've seen that across most of the remote teams that I work with, most of them ask for documentation. And so I'm raising the pattern that I've seen, but that's not prescriptive, right? If your team says, we don't want documentation because it feels like you don't trust us, then say, great, I understand your perspective and I want to be respectful of it. But I also notice that there are these kinds of decisions that we don't do a good job of tracking. How can we make this work better, right? So have that dialogue with them, have a live conversation with them. Don't just document just because I told you to document, right? So again, kind of the root to remember is, how can you best serve your teammates and how can you best serve your customers, knowing that the things that I raise are simply examples of things that I found to help, and knowing that my answers are not universal answers. So that's a really great question. Thank you for asking.
Next one is from Keshav. Three most important steps a product manager should take when joining a firm during these times.
Yeah, great question. So again, kind of a couple of things to differentiate, right? So there's a difference between trying to be hired by a new company, and there's a difference between having been hired and then onboarding. So I want to cut these into two different problems because they're very different problems. So first, in terms of onboarding, right? So say that I was hired by Salesforce as a remote product manager right now, right? And so I've already been hired. I don't need to worry about recruiting. And the things that I need to make sure that I do is, first, that I reach out to all my key stakeholders, right? And if I don't know who my stakeholders are, then I need to first reach out to my manager to ask, hey, who are the people that I'm going to be working with? Because I need to build those relationships with them right now, right? You cannot afford to just be a face on Zoom. You need to be a human being. People need to know that you have their back when you're joining that company, right? Because the thing is, product managers work across customers as well as business stakeholders, as well as engineers and designers, right? And so you really need to make sure that you show up, that people know that they can tell you about all of the problems that they're facing, about all of the processes that they're used to taking, about all of the context with the business, right? So I would say that that's the one most important thing. There's not really three things. It's just make sure that you are constantly proactively reaching out to get as much context as you can of how does this business run? How does my team run? What is my product? What does it do, right? And really demonstrate to others that you're going to be there kind of quote unquote in person, even though you're not, because you understand how important it is to get that context for you to make the most informed decisions as a product manager, right? So that's the one most important thing to do when you're joining a company, is that you need to take charge of your own onboarding. You can't just say, oh, my company gave me an onboarding guide and I'll just do the guide and I'll be done, right? Because the thing is, when a company gives you an onboarding guide, it's their assumption of what you need, but they don't actually know what you need. And so you need to take that on yourself and say, great, I'll go do this onboarding guide, but what else do I need, right? Who else do I work with? Who am I going to work with in sales? Who will I work with in support? Who do I work with in marketing, right? Can I get a one-on-one with each of my engineers so that they understand that I'm here to help them and that I don't want to break the way that they're doing things. I want to understand why they're doing things the way that they're doing it so that I can fit in better, right? So again, make sure that you reach out, get all of that context, understand not just the company, but the people and the processes that are in that company. So that is the one most important thing to do when you are joining a company that has already hired you. If your question is about how do I get hired by a different company right now, then my tips go back to what I previously mentioned of one, what type of company do you actually want to go for, right? So again, we can't just target any market, right? Products are not omni market. Products only fit specific markets. Again, credit cards, credit cards are products that work pretty well in the United States, but they don't work that well in China, right? And so there's no such thing as a universally good product. Similarly, there are no such things as universally good product managers. So you need to understand which type of employer do I want to serve? What type of industry, what size, what type of culture, right? And then from there, then we can ask, great, for these companies that I want to specifically go after, why do they need a product manager? Are they trying to start a whole new business? Are they trying to build a whole new infrastructure? Are they trying to ship a mobile app when they didn't have a mobile app before? Are they trying to break into a new geography or a new marketplace, right? All of these questions determine whether you will be a good product market fit with that company, right? And so again, it's all about making sure that you understand the pain of that company. Because once you understand the pain, then you can decide, okay, I am a good fit. And then you make sure that you position yourself as that good fit, right? And so again, we don't want to go in there and just say, oh, I'm a product manager and I want to be hired, right? Because that doesn't help anyone. We need to really focus on who are the people that we're going to help and how will we help them, right? So again, don't just go in saying, I want you to hire me. Go in with a clear statement. This is your pain based on what I know. Here's how I will solve that pain. And if you hire me, I will get rid of that pain for you, right? If you can't make that statement, then you don't know why you're going for that company. And that company then doesn't know why they want you, right? So again, you really need to understand what the company needs so that you can serve that pain. If you can't do it, you shouldn't apply.
Thanks. I hope this answers Keshav. Next, we have question from Suchita. Actually, she has two questions. Any tips to reduce number of calls per day? Whole day goes in hand holding and very less time in own planned work and meet commitments. And second question is, can you suggest certificates for being a better product manager, preferably from different geographies?
Yeah, for sure. So I do want to call out that unfortunately we are at the hour. So this is going to be the last two questions that I answer. So first off, in terms of reducing the number of calls, right? So one of the things that we need to keep in mind is a call is simply a tool, right? It is a way for us to work. And so that means that calls are not all equally important. Each call serves a specific purpose with a specific cadence, right? So one of the things that is helpful is to do an audit of your calendar and look at the calls that don't need to happen as frequently. So one of the things that can be very true is, before, back when I was in the office, I had a lot of friends who were in different departments. And so these friends, I would regularly go out with them, whether it was during the middle of the workday, to be able to go for a walk or whatever. And so we might have weekly cadences, right? Well, the thing is, I'm not working with them immediately right now, unfortunately. And so it's not a good use of their time, and it's not a good use of my time to continue to have that one-on-one cadence. And so by removing those sets of one-on-ones, now I can focus on the people that I really need to focus on. It's a prioritization question, right? On top of that, for the people who you are regularly talking with, right, in terms of those particular meetings, well, let's try to understand, do they need to happen that frequently? What is the agenda of this meeting, right? And so again, it is really important, as an example, that I have a weekly one-on-one with my engineering manager, because we need to make sure that we are working really closely with our team and that we know the priorities, that we know how to deal with upcoming asks, right? But it's not as important for me to make sure that I have a weekly or bi-weekly check-in with each engineer. Maybe I only need to check in with them once a month, right? And that's really up to you to make the call of how important is it for me to make sure that I'm aligned with them versus making sure that I have time to do my own work, right? So there's another way of making calendars less packed, which is being able to say, hey, I don't want all of these meetings, right? Like, let's reduce the frequency, not because I don't care about you, but because I do care about you. I want to make sure that you're getting exactly what you need from me, and that I'm not wasting your time, right? So that's something else that you can do. Another thing that's very helpful is, rather than letting other people control your calendar, you need to control your own calendar. And what I mean by that is, many times product managers receive a lot of meetings from nowhere, right? And so then we just say, okay, well, we have to accept all these meetings because people want it. Well, if instead on your calendar you say, my mornings are always going to be work for myself. No one is allowed to mess with me or like have meetings with me in the mornings because you made that decision. And then someone tries to schedule over that time, you can say, hey, unfortunately, I can't take a meeting at that time. Please schedule it in the afternoon, right? And so then that way you can have that time to do deep work. You need to control your calendar. The other thing that's also really important is to ask people, why did you want me in this meeting? What value am I supposed to drive? Because the thing is, while I've asked all of you to become better at driving meetings by sending out agendas, by sending out attendees and knowing which attendee is going to do what, your partners across the organization may not really understand what that process looks like. And so it is okay for you to decline meetings if you don't have a clear role. It is also okay for you to decline meetings if someone does not send you an agenda, right? And so you can say, I'm sorry, I need to focus, and it looks like you don't have an agenda for this meeting. Once you have an agenda for this meeting, let's decide whether I should attend or not. But because you sent me a blank calendar invite, I must reject, right? Similarly, if someone says, oh, I'd love to have you at this meeting because that way you can show emotional support, or you can make sure that there's a presence in the room or whatever, you can say, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm really flattered that you think of me that way, but it is not an effective use of my time. I need to go do these other priorities, right? And then you can reject that meeting. So again, you don't have to let other people hold your calendar hostage. You can actually take control of your calendar. So in terms of certifications, again, this goes all the way back to what I said about what companies do you care about, right? So some companies want certifications, and some companies care a lot about very specific certifications. Other companies don't. And so the thing is, I cannot tell you universally that there is some magic certification that companies love, because there isn't, right? Some startups actually don't want you to be certified. Why is that? Well, the thing is, if you took the time to be certified, you're learning all this information from someone else, and then you're not thinking for yourself. You're not demonstrating that you have your own drive and you have your own mindset. And so that startup says, well, we need people who think differently. And so if you have a certification, that means that you think the same as everyone else, and we don't want you, right? And I've actually seen a lot of great candidates get rejected because they have certifications, right? So don't make the assumption that a certification is universally good. Ask the question, for this company, do they value certifications? And if they value certifications, why do they value certifications? Which certifications do they value, right? So again, there are some companies that value certain things and some companies that don't. Google likes MBAs, but Blizzard, which is a gaming company, doesn't really care about MBAs. They want you to get a PMP, a project manager professional certificate, right? And that's very, very different, right? And so if you said, I want to work for really big companies, what's the one certificate that works? Well, there isn't, because Google wants the MBA, but Blizzard wants the PMP, and those two aren't the same, right? And so again, really, really ask yourself the question, what company do I want to go after? What pains do they have? Why do they want certifications if they want certifications, right? And then demonstrate that you understand that pain and get that certification, right? So again, there's no one clear answer to what certification is going to work the best. because every company needs different things, right? So the thing that we have to remember about product management is it's not a regulated field in that there's no governing body that says, hey, this is what every product manager does. So as an example, if you're going to be an accountant, right, you can be a CPA, right? If you're going to be a financial analyst, you can be a CFA, right? These are global standards because they're things that this industry has agreed on. But those industries have been around for a really long time. Product management is relatively new. And so we don't have any sort of standards that govern us. Because we have no standards, then the only standard that matters is the company standard, right? For the company that you want to join, what do they care about? If they don't care about it, don't get it, right? Because if you get it, it means that you're saying, I actively don't care that you don't want this, right? I'm going to go do my own thing. And then you demonstrate that you're being selfish and that you're being thoughtless rather than being selfless and thoughtful, right? You want to make sure that you understand your company is your customer. And so you need to serve your customer by understanding their pains. If you just get any certification that you want without asking the company, is this the thing that actually matters to you? Then you're wasting their time and you're wasting your money. So again, focus on what does this company need? Then ask, does the certification help with me demonstrating that this company needs it? If you can't answer that question, you shouldn't get it.
Great. Thanks a lot, Clement. We are already short on time, so we can wind up the session here.
Yeah, for sure. Again, thanks everyone for coming today. Thanks so much for asking all of these really insightful questions. And again, for staying up so late at night on a weekend to come listen to me talk. So what I wanted to do is just let you know that there are other resources that you can always get. So, there are other talks that I've made as well. Again, you can always follow me on LinkedIn. You can, buy my books if you're looking to break into product management or level up as a product manager. And you can always find me at productmanagerhq.com, where I write about product management best practices. And so again, really appreciate kind of everyone investing the time to make sure that we take care of our teammates and our customers during these really rough times. I know that it is incredibly difficult for us to all be forced to become remote product managers. And so really, thank you for taking the time to ask me all of these really amazing questions. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Clement. So I hope everyone have got some concrete takeaways from today's session. This was really exciting, and thanks a lot for taking out time and conducting a session for us as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's all. Thanks a lot, everyone. Recording of this session will be published on our YouTube channel. I'll share link of the recording in our Slack community. You can go and check it out there.